The brutal pronouncement hung in the air, echoing in Elaine's mind long after the Alpha King's voice had faded. No. The word was a brand, searing itself onto her soul, marking her as utterly, irrevocably unwanted in the most fundamental way a she-wolf could be. And then the twist. Your name, Eileen, is a relic of a life you no longer possess. From this moment, you are Sen. And Sen will stand beside me, without protection, without status, without claim. The humiliation of being rejected for a bond was swiftly replaced by a chilling dread that settled deep in her bones. She had offered a noble sacrifice, a desperate plea for mercy, and in return, Vorthan had given her a fate far more insidious than simple death or exile. He had condemned her to a life of exposed vulnerability, a living, breathing challenge to the very fabric of pack hierarchy. As the two guards, massive, silent wolves with eyes like chips of obsidian, took her by the arms, the stares of the assembly followed her. They were a mixture of pity, fear, and a morbid fascination. She was a spectacle, a warning, a pawn. The scent of fear, her own and that of the crowd, clung to her like a shroud. Her family, huddled together, looked on with a mixture of sorrow and a bewildered relief that their own sentence, however harsh, had at least been defined. They were exiled to the harsh northern reaches, their names erased, but they would be together. She, however, would be utterly alone, even in the heart of the most powerful pack. The royal wing was a labyrinth of polished stone and heavy tapestries, smelling faintly of ancient wood smoke and something else, a deep, musky scent that was uniquely Vorthan's, a primal signature that seemed to permeate the very walls. The guards led her deeper into the wing, their heavy boots thudding softly on the intricate rugs. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than any words, a constant reminder of her new, anomalous status. She was not a prisoner, not quite. Not a guest, certainly. She was Sen. A name, stripped of her lineage, and a condition, stripped of protection. They stopped before a heavy oak door, intricately carved with symbols of the pack's ancient lineage. One guard pushed it open, revealing a chamber that was both opulent and stark. A vast bed, draped in crimson and gold, dominated the room. A roaring fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on tapestries depicting hunting scenes. But despite the warmth and luxury, an oppressive emptiness filled the space. There were no personal effects, no signs of life, no scent of any wolf who had truly lived here. It was a gilded cage, precisely as she had feared. "Your chambers, Sen," one of the guards rumbled, his voice devoid of inflection. "You will be escorted to the dining hall for your evening meal. Instructions regarding your duties will be delivered by the Alpha King's personal aide in the morning." He paused, his dark eyes sweeping over her. A flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Pity, warning, in their depths. "Do not leave these chambers without escort. Do not speak unless spoken to. And remember your place." The words were blunt, unvarnished. Her place, unclaimed, unbound, utterly vulnerable. He didn't need to elaborate. Every wolf in the pack would understand the unspoken threat. She was fair game, a challenge to their Alpha King's strange decree, and any slight against her would be met with no defense. With a final, unsettling glance, the guards withdrew, the heavy door thudding shut behind them, the click of the latch echoing like a finality. Eileen, or rather Sen, was alone. She walked to the window, pushing aside the heavy velvet drapes. Outside, the night sky was a vast, inky canvas, studded with a million indifferent stars. The full moon, a luminous disk of silver, hung low, casting long, eerie shadows across the snow-covered courtyard below. It was a potent, primal night, a night for wolves to run, to hunt, to bond. But she stood caged. Her inner wolf, usually a comforting presence, now felt distant, muted, as if ashamed. A wave of exhaustion, emotional and physical, washed over her. She sank onto the edge of the plush bed, the soft furs a stark contrast to the hard reality of her situation. What had Vorthan truly meant, truly? Was this a twisted form of mercy, sparing her from exile to be tormented daily? Or was it a strategic move, a public display of his absolute power, breaking not just her spirit, but the very concept of a protective pack bond? She remembered the look in his eyes. Not disdain, but that ancient weariness, a profound understanding of the burden of his rule. And then, the flicker of something else, something she'd identified as fear of mercy. Her hand trembled as she traced the intricate pattern on the bedspread. She was no longer Eileen Calder, daughter of a disgraced family. She was Sen, the Alpha King's shadow, a wolf without a pack, a woman without a name. The weight of it was suffocating. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of her family, their faces blurred by sorrow and distance. Had she truly saved them, or had she simply traded their slow death for a quicker, more agonizing one of her own? A faint scent stirred the air, subtle but unmistakable. It was Vorthan's scent again, stronger now that she was alone in what was presumably his wing of the palace. Pine and snow, yes, but also a deeper, more complex aroma, something wild and untamed, like ancient earth and raw power. It was intoxicating, unsettling, and undeniably potent. It brought with it a phantom memory of his proximity, the sheer oppressive weight of his presence, the way his gaze had burned into her, not in anger, but with an almost predatory assessment. It was a primal magnet, drawing her even as her mind screamed caution. This was the Alpha King, a being whose very existence defied normal boundaries. To be near him, unbound, was to dance with a hungry wolf. She stood up, pacing the luxurious room, her unease growing. She was supposed to be loyal without ownership, without guarantees. But how could she offer loyalty when she had nothing to protect? And how could she protect herself when she had no one to claim her? The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She was an Omega, yes, but she had always held a quiet strength, an inner resilience. Now that felt brittle, fragile. Her gaze fell upon a small carved wooden box on a nearby table, something she hadn't noticed before. It was simple, unadorned, made of dark, polished oak. Curiously, she approached it, her fingers brushing against the smooth, cool wood. It felt ancient, imbued with a quiet power. A strange impulse, a whisper from her dormant wolf, urged her to open it. With a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, lay a single gleaming silver dagger. It was beautifully crafted, its blade honed to a lethal edge, its hilt wrapped in dark leather. It was not a weapon for display. It was a weapon for use. But more than its sharpness, it was the message it conveyed that chilled her to the bone. It was not a gift of protection, it was a tool of self-preservation. A weapon for the unclaimed, for the one who had no one else to fight her battles. It was Vorthan's silent, brutal understanding of her predicament. She picked it up, the cold metal a shocking contrast to her warm skin. It fit perfectly in her hand, feeling unnervingly natural. The weight of it was substantial, a tangible symbol of the solitary path she now walked. Was this a test, a taunt? Or was it a grim prophecy of what lay ahead? The Alpha King had given her no shield, no bond, no claim. But he had given her a blade. And as she looked at her reflection in the polished steel, a stark, pale face staring back, she knew one thing with chilling certainty. The dangers of being Sen were not just external. They would come from within, too, as she learned to wield this blade, both literally and figuratively, in a world that saw her as nothing more than an unprotected sacrifice. The scent of pine and snow, now mixed with the metallic tang of the dagger, filled her senses, a silent promise of the brutal education that awaited her. The silver dagger pulsed with a cold, silent weight in Sen's hand. It wasn't a comfort, but a stark, brutal truth laid bare. No one will protect you but yourself. The words echoed in her mind, a grim mantra. The weapon's edge glinted wickedly under the moonlight, reflecting the pale fear in her own eyes. She was a lamb offered to the wolves, but Vorthan, in his enigmatic cruelty, had also given her a single tooth. What good was one tooth against a hungry pack? Yet, as she clenched her fist around the hilt, a spark of defiance flickered within her. She was Sen, the unclaimed. And perhaps that very lack of claim, that utter isolation, was a weapon in itself. She spent a restless night, the luxurious bed feeling like a cage, the scent of Vorthan, a constant, unsettling presence in the opulent chambers. Sleep came in fitful snatches, haunted by visions of her family's sorrowful faces, and Vorthan's unreadable gaze. The moon, a silent witness, seemed to mock her fragile hope. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and cold silver. She rose, feeling more exhausted than when she had lain down. A soft knock startled her. It was a young she-wolf, scarcely older than a pup. Her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and trepidation. She carried a simple tunic and trousers, woven from fine dark wool, practical, unadorned. "For you, Sen," the girl whispered, her gaze darting nervously around the room, as if fearing Vorthon's ghost. "The Alpha King's aide will arrive shortly to explain your duties." Sen nodded, taking the clothes. Her own garments, the ones she'd worn into the Hall of Judgment, were gone. This was another subtle erasure, another brick in the wall of her new identity. She dressed quickly, the fabric soft against her skin, yet it felt like a uniform, a costume for her new role as the Alpha King's shadow. The dagger she tucked into the waistband of her trousers, hidden beneath the tunic. A small, desperate secret. Shortly after, a lean, older beta wolf with shrewd, observant eyes arrived. His name, he introduced, was Theron, and he was the Alpha King's most trusted advisor. His demeanor was neutral, respectful, yet beneath the surface, Sen sensed a deep curiosity, an attempt to gauge her. He gave her no pity, no scorn, simply a practiced professional assessment. "Sen," Theron began, his voice dry and precise, "your duties are unique. You will accompany the Alpha King at all public functions. You will observe. You will listen. You will learn the ways of the court. You will not offer counsel unless directly asked. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will be seen, but not heard. Your presence is a statement, Sen, a constant reminder of the Alpha King's absolute authority and the price of treason. You are a symbol of his mercy and his power." A symbol. A living monument to Vorthan's will. The words rankled, but she held her tongue, absorbing every instruction. She was to be his silent companion, his shadow, a constant reminder to the court of her unclaimed status and of the unique brand of mercy Vorthan had bestowed. "Your first duty," Theron continued, "is to attend the morning meal with the Alpha King. You will be seated at his side as decreed." He paused, his gaze lingering on her face. "Understand this, Sen. There will be those who resent your presence. Those who will test you. Remember what the Alpha King said. Without protection, without status, without claim, your survival rests solely on your own discretion and your unwavering loyalty to him." He led her through the labyrinthine corridors, past bustling servants and curious guards, their eyes following her, weighing her. Each glance was a tiny prick, a reminder of her exposed state. The whispers, though muffled, reached her ears. The unclaimed one, the traitor's daughter, the Alpha King's peculiar pet. The humiliation gnawed at her, but she held her head high, drawing on a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break, not yet. The dining hall was a vast, cavernous space, filled with the rich scent of roasted meats, fresh bread, and spiced wine. Pack members of various ranks were already gathered, their chatter a low hum that suddenly died as Sen entered with Theron. Every eye turned, fixed on her. She felt the weight of their scrutiny, the keen, assessing gaze of wolves. She was a foreign element, an anomaly in their carefully structured world. And then she saw him. Alpha King Vorthan Belwick sat at the head of a long, polished oak table, a solitary figure radiating an aura of formidable power. He was even more imposing in the daylight, his dark hair falling across his forehead, his face etched with a rugged handsomeness that was both intimidating and undeniably compelling. His storm-gray eyes, keen and intelligent, swept over the assembly, then settled on her. He said nothing, simply gestured to the empty chair beside him. The chair, she noted, was set slightly apart, marking her unique position. It was a throne of thorns, she realized, a place of honor that offered no true solace or safety. She walked towards him, her steps measured, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The air around him shimmered with an almost palpable energy, a primal pull that made her wolf stir uneasily within her. As she took her seat, she felt the heat of his presence, the raw, untamed scent of pine and snow, now mixed with the rich aroma of his morning meal. It was overwhelming, a dizzying cocktail of power and wildness. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, acutely aware of his proximity. the way his broad shoulder was just inches from hers. The meal began in a strained silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery and the low, tense murmurs that occasionally rippled through the hall. Sen ate sparingly, her appetite choked by the tension. She felt Vorthan's gaze on her, a persistent, probing warmth that prickled her skin. Sen. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble, direct and unexpected. The sound sent a shiver through her, a visceral response that was both fear and something else, something deeply primal and unsettling. "You understand the terms of your arrangement?" She met his gaze, holding it steady. "Yes, Alpha King." Her voice was soft but clear. His lips quirked, a ghost of a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good. Loyalty freely given is a rare and precious commodity. Do not disappoint me." His words were a veiled threat, a reminder of the precariousness of her position. But there was something else in his gaze, a fleeting, almost imperceptible glint of challenge, as if he expected her to defy him in some fundamental way. Just then, a sleek, dark-haired she-wolf, elegantly dressed and radiating an air of self-importance, rose from a nearby table. Her name was Sabra, a powerful beta from a rival pack, renowned for her sharp tongue and ambitious nature. Her eyes, narrowed and cold, fixed on Sen. "Alpha King," Sabra's voice was honeyed, but laced with venom. "Forgive my intrusion, but the presence of the traitor's daughter at your side, it offends the sensibilities of loyal pack members. Unclaimed, you say? A wolf without a pack is an abomination, a feral creature. What purpose does she serve, other than to remind us of betrayal?" A collective gasp went through the hall. Sabra's challenge was bold, audacious. Sen felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, her hands clenching under the table. She braced herself for Vorthan's wrath, for the swift, brutal punishment Sabra would surely receive for questioning his decree. She also braced herself for the inevitable. Vorthan would use this as an opportunity to publicly confirm her unprotected status, to let Sabra and all others know that Sen was fair game. But Vorthan merely turned his head, his gaze settling on Sabra. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Sabra," his voice was deceptively calm, a low growl that vibrated with suppressed power. "You question my judgment?" Sabra paled but held her ground. "No, Alpha King, only I question the wisdom of exposing such a fragile creature to the dangers of court. She has no claim, no protection. She is a liability." Her gaze flickered to Sen, a cruel smirk on her lips. Surely a creature so weak, so vulnerable, would only serve to draw unwanted attention, to perhaps even invite an attack on your very person. A cold dread coiled in Sen's stomach. Sabra wasn't just questioning her status. She was openly challenging Vorthan's decision, implying he was weak for keeping her. And worse, she was subtly threatening Sen, reminding everyone of the very real danger she faced. Vorthan's eyes remained fixed on Sabra, but his hand resting casually on the table slowly balled into a fist. A tremor ran through the hall. Then, to Sen's utter astonishment, he turned his head, his storm-gray eyes locking with hers. There was a spark in their depths, a silent, almost imperceptible command. He wanted her to respond, not for him, but for herself. He had given her a blade, and now he was giving her a stage. The moment stretched, fraught with tension. The entire court held its breath. Sen felt the weight of every gaze, the silent expectation. This was her first test, her first opportunity to prove that the Alpha King's strange decree wasn't a mistake. And as Sabra's smug, cruel smile hardened, Sen understood. Vorthan hadn't offered her mercy in the way she understood it. He had offered her a chance to carve out her own. She took a deep breath, the scent of Vorthan, of danger, and of her own burgeoning defiance filling her lungs. Her hand unconsciously brushed against the dagger hidden at her waist. "Alpha Sabra," Sen said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tense silence. "Perhaps the true vulnerability lies not in being unclaimed, but in believing that a claim alone makes one strong." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Sabra's eyes widened in shock, her face momentarily devoid of its accustomed arrogance. Vorthan's gaze, still fixed on Sen, held a flicker of something new, not surprise, but an intense, almost predatory satisfaction. He had set a trap, and she had walked into it. Not as a victim, but as a predator in her own right. The game had just begun, and the Alpha King, she realized, was far more dangerous, and perhaps far more intriguing than she had ever imagined. The unspoken challenge hung in the air. "You are mine to test, Sen. Let's see if you break." Sen's defiant words hung in the stunned silence of the dining hall, a fragile echo of courage against the crushing weight of expectation. Sabra's face, initially contorted in shock, now flushed a furious crimson. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were wide with disbelief and a wounded pride. The insult, delivered by an unclaimed Omega, was a public shattering of her carefully cultivated authority. Sen felt a tremor run through her, a mix of exhilaration and terror. Had she gone too far? Had she sealed her own doom by speaking out? Even when Vorthen's gaze had seemed to invite it, every eye in the hall was on Vorthen, waiting for his judgment. He remained utterly still, his storm-gray eyes fixed on Sen, a flicker of something unreadable dancing within their depths. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable, thick with the scent of fear and anticipation. Sen's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She had gambled, playing a game she barely understood, with stakes she couldn't fully comprehend. Then Vorthan moved. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, towards Sabra. The air around him seemed to thicken, crackling with an unspoken threat. His voice, when it finally came, was a low, dangerous growl that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. "Sabra," he said, her name a lethal whisper. "You question the wisdom of my choices, and you imply that a wolf's worth is solely measured by the claim of another. Yet, when faced with an inconvenient truth, you stand speechless, unable to defend your own assertion of strength. Perhaps the true vulnerability lies not in being unclaimed, but in a claim that provides no inherent courage of its own." The rebuke was swift, brutal, and utterly devastating. Sabra visibly flinched, her face draining of color. Her pack leader, a burly alpha, who had been watching with growing alarm, quickly rose and bowed his head in deference. "Forgive her, Alpha King," he murmured, his voice laced with apology. "Her zeal sometimes outpaces her judgment." Vorthen merely gave a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Be mindful of your pack, Alpha," he warned, his gaze sweeping over the assembled wolves, a silent reminder of his absolute authority. The strength of a pack is forged in loyalty, not in petty squabbles or unchallenged arrogance. The message was clear. Sabra had not only challenged Sen, but Vorthen himself, and he had used Sen's words to deliver a crushing blow to a formidable beta. The tension in the hall, while still potent, shifted. Now it was tinged with a grudging respect for Sen, and a renewed, almost fearful awe for Vorthen. He had not defended her directly, but he had used her as a weapon, proving his point about inherent strength. Sen felt a strange mix of relief and renewed unease. She had survived her first public challenge, but the cost was a deeper entanglement in Vorthan's complex web. She was a silent tool in his hands, her very existence a challenge to the established order. This was not safety, this was a higher form of danger. The meal continued, though the atmosphere remained heavy. No one dared to speak above a whisper, and every glance toward Sen was now laced with a new kind of scrutiny. She was not just the traitor's daughter, she was the Alpha King's strange, dangerous experiment. Later that day, Theron sought her out in her chambers. He carried a stack of ancient scrolls and a quill. "The Alpha King wishes you to begin your studies, Sen," he stated, his expression impassive. "The history of the northern packs, the lineage of the Alpha Kings, ancient treaties, and the laws of the land." Sen raised an eyebrow. "I am to be a scholar, Theron." He offered a rare, almost imperceptible smile. "You are to understand the world you stand within, Sen, to understand the currents of power, the history of alliances and betrayals. The Alpha King believes that knowledge, freely acquired, is a potent form of defense. He will quiz you personally on these texts." A knot formed in Sen's stomach. Vorthan was not just making her a symbol. He was actively shaping her, educating her, giving her the tools to survive, but also implicitly binding her to his world. This was far more intricate than simple servitude. This was mentorship, albeit a brutal one, from the most dangerous wolf she had ever met. She spent the next few days immersed in dusty tomes, her mind grappling with centuries of pack lore. The sheer weight of history, the brutal cycles of power and conquest, the intricate dance of loyalty and betrayal. It was overwhelming. She learned of Vorthan's ancestors, formidable Alpha Kings, who had forged the empire through blood and iron. She learned of the ancient curses, the prophecies, the primal bonds that held their world together. And through it all, she began to see the threads that wove into Vorthan himself. His solitary nature, his unyielding will, his profound understanding of power and its loneliness. One evening, as the silver light of the moon streamed through her window, she was summoned. Not by Theron, but by a silent, imposing guard who simply gestured for her to follow. Her heart pounded as she walked through the dimly lit corridors, the silence broken only by the soft pad of their footsteps. They stopped before a heavy, unmarked door she had never noticed before, deep within a secluded part of the royal wing. The guard pushed it open, revealing a chamber unlike any she had seen. It was a private study filled with books from floor to ceiling, their spines gleaming in the soft glow of a single hearth. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment, pipe tobacco, and, overwhelmingly, Vorthan. He sat at a massive claw-footed desk, poring over a map, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wore no formal robes, only a simple tunic and dark trousers, his powerful forearms bare. He looked less like a king and more like a warrior, a scholar, a wolf burdened by the weight of his world. He didn't look up immediately. Sen stood awkwardly just inside the doorway, waiting, her gaze drawn to the scarred lines on his hands, the intensity of his focus. She noticed a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in his left hand as he traced a line on the map, a sign of some ancient injury, perhaps. It was a fleeting glimpse of vulnerability, quickly dismissed by his formidable aura. "Sen," he finally said, his voice a low, resonant rumble, without lifting his head. "Tell me of the Battle of the Whispering Peaks." She took a deep breath, recalling the details from her studies. It was fought 3 centuries ago, Alpha King, between the northern and western packs, a conflict sparked by a disputed hunting ground. The northern Alpha, Kalen, secured a decisive victory, but at great personal cost. He lost his chosen mate in the battle. Vorthan finally looked up, his storm-gray eyes piercing. "And what does that tell you of power, Sen?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "That power, however absolute, rarely comes without sacrifice. That even an Alpha King can be broken by loss." A strange, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his expression. It wasn't quite a smile, but a softening around the edges of his formidable features. "Indeed," he murmured, leaning back in his chair, his gaze holding hers. "And what of loyalty, Sen? What have your studies taught you of loyalty when faced with such absolute power?" "That it can be coerced," she replied, her voice steady, "or it can be freely given. The latter is far more enduring, but also far more dangerous for the one who receives it. For if it is freely given, it can also be freely withdrawn." Vorthan's gaze sharpened, a flicker of something intense in his eyes. "Dangerous, you say?" "Yes," Sen affirmed, her inner wolf stirring, emboldened by the raw honesty of their exchange. "Because it implies vulnerability. The absolute ruler who receives freely given loyalty must also allow themselves to be vulnerable enough to trust it. And that, Alpha King, is a power that cannot be crushed, only earned." The words hung between them, a silent challenge, a profound truth. Vorthan studied her, his expression unreadable, yet there was a deep, almost primal intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch. He rose slowly from his desk, his towering form casting a long shadow across the room. He walked towards her, his movements silent, predatory. Sen felt her pulse quicken, every instinct screaming at her to flee, yet she held her ground, meeting his gaze. He stopped inches from her, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from him, to be enveloped by his potent scent of pine, snow, and something else now, something raw and undeniable, a deep, earthy musk that spoke of untamed wilderness and ancient power. It was a scent that bypassed her mind and went straight to her primal core, stirring a dangerous, unsettling recognition. "You speak of vulnerability, Sen," he murmured, his voice a low, husky growl that sent shivers down her spine. "Yet you stand before me, an unclaimed Omega, defying the very fabric of our world, speaking truths no other would dare. Is that not a vulnerability of its own, or is it a strength you wield with a terrifying grace?" His hand, scarred and powerful, reached out, not to touch her, but to brush a stray strand of hair from her face. A feather-light contact that sent a jolt through her. His fingers lingered for a bare moment, sending a trail of fire across her skin before withdrawing. It was an intimate gesture, unexpected, unsettling, and utterly captivating. The greatest power, Vorthen continued, his eyes locked with hers, is to expose oneself, yet remain unbroken, to be free of claims, yet to forge bonds stronger than any decree. His gaze dropped to her lips, and for a heart-stopping moment Sen thought he would kiss her. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a raw primal energy that threatened to consume them both. But then his eyes hardened, the moment of vulnerability gone, replaced by the familiar mask of the Alpha King. He stepped back, breaking the spell, leaving Sen breathless and trembling. "You have much to learn, Sen," he stated, his voice now crisp and commanding. "And I have much to teach you, but remember this. The serpent's coil is subtle, and true power often hides in plain sight." He turned away, dismissing her with a final, lingering glance. As the guard led her back to her chambers, Sen's mind reeled. He had touched her. Not in anger, not in punishment, but with an almost tender intimacy that had shaken her to her core. He saw her, truly saw her, not just as a symbol, but as something more, something dangerous. The dagger at her waist felt heavier, but now it was not just a weapon against others. It was a constant reminder of the volatile, uncharted territory she was navigating, alone, with a man who was both her captor and, in his own twisted way, her most profound teacher. The serpent's coil, indeed, and she was already entangled. The touch of Vorthen's fingers, fleeting yet searing, lingered on Sen's skin for days. It was a phantom heat, a constant reminder of the intimate exchange in his study, a moment when the Alpha King had peeled back a sliver of his formidable mask. That brush of skin, the way his gaze had dropped to her lips, had ignited a spark deep within her, a dangerous, forbidden awareness of him, not just as her Alpha King, but as a man. It was unsettling, thrilling, and utterly terrifying in her unbound state. Life in the palace settled into a strange rhythm. Sen continued her studies with Theron, devouring ancient texts and learning the intricate politics of the various allied and rival pacts. Her days were a blur of lessons, observations, and the constant, subtle scrutiny of the court. She attended dinners, councils, and ceremonial gatherings, always at Vorthen's side, a silent, watchful shadow. Her presence was now an accepted, if still peculiar, fixture. The whispers hadn't ceased, but they had changed, evolving from open scorn to cautious speculation. Some saw her as a strange pet, others as a powerful, unspoken challenge to the status quo. No one, however, dared to openly insult her after Sabra's public humiliation. The dagger at her waist, though unseen, remained a constant, cold comfort. Vorthen himself remained an enigma. He was a whirlwind of controlled power, his schedule packed with strategizing, training, and managing the vast network of his pack. He was always moving, always thinking, his presence a constant pressure in the palace. He would summon her to his study at unpredictable times, usually late at night, to quiz her on her studies, to discuss pack politics, or simply to sit in companionable silence while he worked. These sessions, initially fraught with tension, slowly began to feel less like tests and more like something else, a shared space, a quiet understanding that bypassed words. During one such late-night session, Vorthen was hunched over a map, his brow furrowed in concentration. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sen sat nearby, ostensibly reading, but acutely aware of his every movement, the subtle shift of his weight, the deep, even rhythm of his breathing. The scent of pine, snow, and old parchment filled the air, comforting in its familiarity, yet still intensely potent. "The northern borders are restless," he murmured, more to himself than to her, his finger tracing a jagged line across the map. "The ice wolves are encroaching, testing our defenses. A harsh winter makes them bolder." Sen lowered her book. "The ancient treaties dictate a period of negotiation before direct conflict, Alpha King. Is there evidence they have violated the terms?" He looked up, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers. "Evidence can be manufactured. Intent, however, is harder to hide. They crave our southern lands, our warmer hunting grounds. A cold moon makes wolves desperate. His gaze lingered on her, a strange intensity in its depths. Desperation can drive any wolf to extreme measures, Sen, even those who claim loyalty. His words struck a chord, a subtle warning that resonated with her own precarious position. Loyalty freely given could indeed be freely withdrawn, and desperation was a dangerous companion. He rose then, stretching, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his tunic. He walked to the window, gazing out at the moon-drenched courtyard. The full moon, a silent, powerful entity, hung high in the sky, casting the world in an ethereal silver glow. It was a night for shifters, a night when the primal urge ran strongest. "Do you miss the run, Sen?" he asked, his voice low, his back to her. The question caught her off guard. She hadn't allowed herself to think of it, of the exhilarating freedom of shifting, of running through the forest with her pack, the wind in her fur, the earth beneath her paws. Her inner wolf, long dormant, stirred, a faint ache in her chest. "I miss the freedom, Alpha King," she admitted softly. "The connection to the wild." He turned, his eyes searching her face. "You feel the pull tonight, don't you?" It wasn't a question, but an observation, a knowing recognition. His own primal energy was almost palpable, a contained storm of raw power that thrummed beneath his skin. Sen nodded, a lump forming in her throat. To deny it would be a lie. "Yes, it is a powerful moon." Vorthen walked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate, until he stood directly in front of her. The air between them crackled with an unspoken tension, a raw, undeniable pull that defied all logic, all protocol. "The unclaimed wolf," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her throat, where her pulse beat a frantic rhythm. An anomaly, a mystery. His hand, large and calloused, reached out, and this time it didn't just brush. He cupped her jaw, his thumb stroking gently along her cheekbone. The touch was electric, sending a shiver of both fear and intense pleasure through her. Her breath hitched. His eyes, molten silver in the moonlight, held hers, a fierce, protective intensity, warring with a primal hunger she instinctively recognized. "You speak of loyalty and vulnerability," he whispered, his voice husky, laced with a raw emotion she hadn't heard before. "But what of the alpha who carries the weight of an entire pack? Who must always be strong, always unyielding? Is there not a vulnerability in that too, Sen? A loneliness that even power cannot fill?" His words, spoken with such raw honesty, pierced her carefully constructed defenses. She saw it then in the depths of his storm-gray eyes, the profound solitude of his position, the burden of his destiny. He was not just the feared Alpha King. He was a wolf alone at the summit, burdened by a power that isolated him. And in that moment, for the first time, she felt a surge of something akin to empathy, a deep, resonant understanding that transcended their assigned roles. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "a profound loneliness, Alpha King." His thumb stroked her cheek again, a soft, tender caress that melted away her fear, replacing it with a dizzying rush of sensation. His scent, intoxicating and primal, filled her senses, blurring the edges of her awareness. She found herself leaning into his touch, drawn by an irresistible force. "You call me Alpha King," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "But you see me, don't you, Sen? You see the wolf beneath the crown." Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment, overwhelmed by the intensity of his presence. "I do," she breathed, her voice a barely audible tremor. He leaned closer, his breath warm on her lips, the subtle scent of him driving every other thought from her mind. Her heart pounded, a wild drum in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, to remember her place, her unprotected status, but a deeper, more primal instinct, one she hadn't known existed, urged her closer. "And what does the wolf see in you, Sen?" he whispered, his voice a low, seductive growl that vibrated through her very bones. "The unclaimed one, the broken one. Or the one whose spirit burns with a defiance that challenges even my own?" His lips brushed hers, a feather-light touch that sent an electric current through her entire body. It was a hesitant kiss, a question, an unspoken promise. Her mind reeled, every nerve ending alive with sensation, This was forbidden. This was dangerous. This was everything she had feared, and everything she suddenly, desperately craved. The kiss deepened, a slow, tender exploration that stole her breath. His hand moved from her jaw to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, pulling her closer until her body was pressed against his. His other arm wrapped around her waist, holding her tight, possessively. The world outside them ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his body, the intoxicating taste of his lips, the dizzying scent of him. Her inner wolf, once dormant, roared to life, a wild, ecstatic surge of recognition. He broke the kiss slowly, reluctantly, his forehead resting against hers, his breath ragged. His eyes, still molten silver, were intense, searching. "Sen," he breathed, her name a rough whisper on his lips. "You are not just a symbol. You are a threat. To my control, to my solitude, and to my heart." The confession, raw and unexpected, stunned her. My heart. The Alpha King, feared and unyielding, was admitting to a vulnerability she hadn't dared to imagine. But before she could fully process his words, a sudden, sharp knock echoed from the door. Vorthon stiffened, his eyes hardening, the mask of the Alpha King slamming back into place. He stepped back from her, the space between them suddenly vast and cold. The raw emotion that had briefly flared in his eyes was replaced by a formidable, unreadable gaze. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "Enter," he commanded, his voice crisp, devoid of any trace of the intimacy they had just shared. Theron entered, his expression grave. "Alpha King, urgent news from the northern border. The Ice Wolves have launched a full-scale raid on the outlying settlements. They have taken hostages." Vorthon's face tightened, his jaw clenching. All traces of tenderness, of vulnerability vanished, replaced by the grim resolve of a warrior. He was the Alpha King once more, burdened by his pack, by the threat of war. He glanced at Sen, a fleeting, almost regretful look in his eyes, before turning his full attention to Theron. "Mobilize the warriors, prepare for immediate deployment. I will lead the advance." Sen stood there, trembling, the echo of his kiss still burning on her lips, the scent of him still clinging to her skin. He had confessed to a vulnerability, to a feeling, but duty had called, and he had instantly reverted to his role, leaving her adrift in the wake of their stolen moment. The kiss had changed everything, yet nothing at all. She was still Sen, the unclaimed, and the world was still a dangerous place, the serpent's coil indeed. And now, war was knocking at the Alpha King's door, threatening to unravel not just his borders, but the fragile, impossible bond that had just begun to form between them. The abrupt shift from stolen intimacy to the stark reality of war left Sen reeling. One moment, Vorthon's lips were on hers, his whispered confession of a threatened heart hanging in the air. The next, he was the unyielding Alpha King, his face etched with grim determination, his mind already on the ravaged northern borders. The transition was brutal, a stark reminder of the chasm between his private self and his public persona, and the immense burden he carried. She was left standing in the silent study, the scent of his skin still intoxicatingly close, the echo of his kiss still burning on her lips, feeling utterly abandoned and exposed. The palace erupted into a frenzy of activity. Warriors moved with silent urgency, their armor clinking, their eyes grim. The air, usually thick with the scent of pine and polished stone, was now laced with the sharp tang of steel, sweat, and the underlying current of adrenaline. Theron, ever efficient, barked orders, coordinating supplies and routes. Vorthon himself was a whirlwind of controlled power, meeting with his beta generals, poring over maps, his voice a low authoritative rumble that cut through the chaos. Sen watched him from a distance, a silent observer in the midst of the storm. He was magnificent in his leadership, a true alpha, radiating an aura of unwavering strength and resolve. Yet she couldn't shake the memory of his vulnerability, the brief raw admission of loneliness, the tenderness of his kiss. How could such a formidable wolf carry such burdens, and still offer a moment of such profound intimacy? It was a paradox that twisted her heart. She found herself gravitating to the windows, gazing out at the full moon that still hung high in the sky, a silent witness to both the tenderness and the terror of the night. Her inner wolf, once dormant, now thrummed with a restless energy, awakened by Vorthan's touch, by the primal pull of the moon, and by the looming threat of battle. She felt a desperate urge to run, to shift, to join the warriors, to protect what was hers, but what was truly hers. She was Sen, the unclaimed, the one without a pack, without a purpose in war. A hand touched her shoulder, making her jump. It was Theron, his shrewd eyes studying her with an unusual depth. "The Alpha King has gone," he said, his voice softer than usual. "He left moments ago with the advance guard." Sen turned, her heart sinking. "He left without—" She trailed off, feeling foolish. Why would he say goodbye to her, his unclaimed shadow, when he was marching to war? Theron seemed to read her thoughts. "The Alpha King carries many burdens, Sen. His focus must be absolute, but he left instructions." He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "He instructed me to ensure your continued safety and to ensure your studies do not falter. He also said—" Theron hesitated, then continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "He said to tell you to trust your instincts, and to remember what he taught you about the serpent's coil." The message was cryptic, yet it resonated deeply within her. Trust your instincts, serpent's coil. It was a test, a warning, and a strange, veiled reassurance all at once. He was leaving her unprotected, yet he expected her to survive, to learn, to grow. He was teaching her not to rely on his claim, but on her own burgeoning strength. The days that followed were tense. Reports from the northern border were grim. The ice wolves were brutal, their attacks swift and merciless. Casualties were high. The palace, once bustling, now felt strangely empty, filled with the anxious whispers of those left behind. Sen continued her studies, but her mind was constantly on Vorthan, on the dangers he faced, on the fragile hope that had ignited between them. One afternoon, as she was poring over ancient maps, trying to understand the strategic importance of the contested territories, she overheard hushed voices from a nearby corridor. Two beta guards, usually stoic and disciplined, were speaking in low, urgent tones. "They say the Alpha King was ambushed," one whispered, his voice laced with fear. Deep in the whispering peaks, a trap. The ice wolves knew his movements. "And the hostages?" the other asked, his voice strained. "What of them?" "Slaughtered," the first guard replied, a tremor in his voice. "A brutal display, and the Alpha King. He fought like a demon, but he was outnumbered. Injured, they say. Badly." Sen's blood ran cold. Injured, badly. The words echoed in her mind, chilling her to the bone, her breath caught in her throat. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. A sickening fear coiled in her stomach. Vorthan, the man who had touched her, who had shown her a glimpse of his own profound loneliness, was hurt. She pushed away from the table, her mind racing. The serpent's coil. Trust her instincts. What did it mean? A trap. How could the ice wolves have known his movements? Unless there was a traitor within the pack. She remembered Sabra's words, her veiled threats, her ambition, and she remembered her own words. Loyalty freely given can also be freely withdrawn. And Vorthan's response. Desperation can drive any wolf to extreme measures, Sen, even those who claim loyalty. A terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. What if the traitor was not just within the pack, but within the Alpha King's inner circle? Someone with enough access and enough cunning to orchestrate such an ambush, to betray the Alpha King's movements. Driven by a desperate urgency, Sen sought out Theron. She found him in the war room, his face pale and drawn as he studied a map, surrounded by beta generals. The air was thick with the scent of despair and frustration. "Theron," Sen said, her voice cutting through the tense silence, surprisingly steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I need to speak with you, privately." He looked up, surprised by her directness. The beta generals exchanged uneasy glances. "Sen, this is hardly the time." "It is precisely the time," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. "It concerns the Alpha King and the ambush." Theron, seeing the conviction in her eyes, nodded slowly. He dismissed the generals, who left with reluctant, curious glances. Once they were alone, Sen wasted no time. "Theron, I believe there is a traitor in the Alpha King's inner circle," she stated, her voice low and urgent. Someone is feeding information to the ice wolves. The ambush, the precise knowledge of his movements. It's too deliberate. Theron's eyes narrowed, his expression grim. That is a grave accusation, Sen. On what grounds do you make it? On the grounds of observation and the Alpha King's own words, she explained, her mind working furiously, piecing together fragments of conversations, subtle behaviors. He spoke of desperation, of loyalty that could be withdrawn, and Sabra, her challenge to me, her veiled threats, her ambition. She holds influence with the Western Pack, who have always coveted these lands. Theron listened, his face a mask of careful neutrality, but Sen could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. Sabra is a powerful beta, he mused, and her family does have ancient ties to the western border, but to betray the Alpha King, it would be suicide. Unless she had a guarantee of success, Sen countered. Unless she believed she could gain something greater than her current standing. What if she made a pact with the Ice Wolves? To weaken Vorthan, to create a power vacuum, to perhaps even install her own alpha, or take a position of power in a new order? The implications were staggering. Theron ran a hand through his hair, his eyes troubled. This is dangerous territory, Sen. Without proof. Then we must find proof, Sen interrupted, her resolve hardening. If Vorthan is injured, if his command is compromised, then the entire pack is vulnerable. And if there is a traitor, they will not stop at a single ambush. They will use this opportunity to strike again, perhaps even at the heart of the palace. She paused, looking at Theron, her gaze unwavering. The Alpha King told me to trust my instincts. My instincts tell me the serpent's coil is tightening, and its head is closer than we think. He gave me a blade, Theron, and he taught me to use it. Theron stared at her, a profound realization dawning in his eyes. He saw not just the unclaimed Omega, but the fiercely intelligent, loyal wolf Vorthan had been subtly cultivating. He saw the strength beneath the vulnerability. What do you propose? He asked, his voice low, filled with a new urgency. I propose we look for the serpent in plain sight, Sen replied, her mind already spinning with possibilities. And we expose it before it can strike again. But we must do it quietly. No one, not even the other generals, can know. If there is a traitor, they will be watching. Theron nodded, his face grim. Very well, Sen, you have my trust. Where do we begin? Sen looked towards the northern sky, her heart aching with fear for Vorthan, but also burning with a fierce protective resolve. She was unclaimed, yes, but she was not powerless. And if Vorthan had entrusted her with this dangerous knowledge, with this nascent understanding, then she would not fail him. The serpent was coiling, and she, the shadow, would be the one to strike its head. The whispers of a shared heart, she realized, were not just about romance. They were about a profound, unspoken trust, forged in the crucible of power and vulnerability, and that trust would now be tested by fire. The weight of their shared secret settled heavily between Sen and Theron. The palace, once a place of subtle intrigue, now felt overtly menacing, every shadow a potential hiding place for the serpent. Theron, his years of loyal service etched onto his face, was a study in controlled tension. He moved with a renewed purpose, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing every interaction. Sen, meanwhile, had to maintain her usual facade of silent observation, a constant struggle against the storm of fear and urgency churning within her. Their investigation began in the quietest, most unassuming ways. Theron, with his access to all pack records and communications, started discreetly scrutinizing supply logs, patrol routes, and historical communications with the Western Pack, Sabra's ancestral territory. Sen, with her unique position as Vorthan's shadow, focused on observing the court, paying particular attention to Sabra and her closest allies. She watched for subtle shifts in behavior, nervous glances, hushed conversations, any deviation from their usual routines. The days crawled by, each one bringing more grim news from the northern front. Vorthan's injuries were confirmed, though details remained scarce, veiled in official reports designed to prevent panic. The pack was fighting valiantly, but the Ice Wolves were relentless, clearly emboldened by their initial success. The realization that Vorthan was fighting a war on two fronts, against an external enemy and an internal betrayal, spurred Sen to greater resolve. During a late-night meeting in Theron's secluded office, filled with stacks of old documents and the scent of aged parchment. Sen shared her observations. Sabra has been meeting frequently with Beta Magnar, the head of the supply convoys, she reported, her voice low. Their meetings are always brief, always away from the main thoroughfares, and their expressions are always guarded. Theron nodded, making a note. Magnar is known for his connections to various merchant guilds on the western border. If there were a way to subtly divert supplies, or to misplace intelligence, he would be the one with the means. And the Western Pack itself, Sen added. Their alpha has been strangely quiet during this conflict. No offers of aid, no demands for updates. Almost as if they are waiting for the outcome, Theron murmured, his eyes narrowed in thought. A power vacuum, a weakened Alpha King. It would be an opportune moment for them to expand their influence, perhaps even through a proxy. The pieces began to click into place, forming a chilling picture of betrayal and ambition. Sabra, with her powerful family ties and connections, conspiring with Magnar to cripple Vorthan's forces from within, while the Western Pack waited in the wings, ready to capitalize on the chaos. But proof, Sen insisted, her mind racing. We need something undeniable, something that links them directly to the Ice Wolves or to the ambush. Theron sighed, running a hand over his tired face. It is a dangerous game, Sen. Sabra is well connected. Accusations without concrete evidence would be suicide, for us and for the stability of the pack. Just then, a messenger arrived, breathless, his face pale. Theron, news from the northern front. A patrol found a messenger hawk, shot down but carrying a scroll. It appears to be from Alpha King Vorthan himself. He's requesting urgent reinforcements, but also a specific type of medicinal herb, rare in these parts, but found in the western forests. He sent a separate coded message to you, Theron. Theron's eyes widened. He quickly dismissed the messenger, then unrolled the scroll, his fingers trembling slightly. The coded message was short, but its implications sent a jolt through Sen. Serpent's coil, the bite is deep. Trust the unclaimed. Deploy false flag. False flag, Theron repeated, his voice barely a whisper. He knows, Sen. He knows there's a traitor, and he's using this request for medicine as a trap. Sen's heart pounded. Vorthan was not just injured. He was strategizing, even from the front lines. He had anticipated betrayal, and he was testing it. The request for the rare herb found in the western forest was a bait. If Sabra and Magnar were indeed involved, they would likely try to intercept the supply, or use this as another opportunity to sabotage. The Alpha King is still strong, Sen breathed, a surge of fierce pride and relief washing over her. Even injured, he is thinking steps ahead. He means for us to expose them, Theron said, his eyes now alight with a grim determination. He's given us the means. We will arrange a decoy convoy carrying the medicinal herbs and reinforcement plans. We will make sure the details reach Sabra and Magnar through the usual channels, through their network. And then we watch, Sen finished, her voice firm. We watch where the decoy convoy is attacked, where the information is intercepted. That will be our proof. The plan was set in motion with a speed and secrecy that spoke volumes of Theron's loyalty and skill. A small, carefully chosen group of loyal guards was assembled, sworn to absolute discretion. A decoy convoy, carrying false plans and an innocuous bundle of common herbs disguised to look rare, was prepared. The information, carefully crafted to appear authentic, was leaked through a trusted but unknowingly compromised contact within Magnar's network. Sen felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. This was a dangerous game. If they were wrong, or if Sabra and Magnar discovered their deception, the consequences would be dire. But the thought of Vorthan, injured and vulnerable, relying on her, on them, gave her a fierce resolve. The day the decoy convoy was scheduled to depart, the tension in the palace was almost unbearable. Sen, maintaining her public role, sat by the Alpha King's empty chair at the morning meal, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the court. She watched Sabra, who seemed unusually agitated, her eyes constantly darting towards Magnar. She watched Magnar, whose usual bluster was replaced by a nervous energy, a constant shifting in his seat. As the morning progressed, a message arrived, ostensibly from the convoy. Reporting a slight delay in departure, it was a prearranged signal. The trap was set. Now they waited. Hours later, as twilight began to bleed across the sky, painting the windows in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, a frantic messenger burst into the great hall. Alpha Theron, the convoy. It was attacked. In the western valley near the ancient Silverwood Pass. A gasp went through the hall. Theron, his face grim, rushed forward. Casualties? None, Alpha Theron, the messenger exclaimed, breathless. The guards were prepared. They fought off the attackers, but they captured one of them. A Western pack scout. And they found these. He held up a bundle of scrolls, clearly marked with the symbols of the ice wolves. Theron took the scrolls, his eyes sweeping over them. And who was leading the attack? They had a clear leader, Alpha Theron, the messenger replied, his voice still trembling. One of their own, a beta from the Western pack, known for his ferocity, and he was clearly working with the ice wolves. Sen's heart leaped into her throat. It wasn't Sabra or Magnar directly, but a clear link to the Western pack, working in concert with the ice wolves, and targeting a convoy that only the Alpha King's inner circle knew about. The serpent's coil was indeed tightening. Just then, Sabra, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing horror, let out a choked gasp. Her eyes, wide and terrified, met Magnar's across the hall. The silent confession passed between them, a chilling confirmation of their guilt. Their faces, pale and drawn, clearly betrayed their knowledge of the ambush. Before Sabra or Magnar could react, Theron's voice, now a thunderous roar, filled the hall. Seize them, Sabra, beta of the Western lineage. Magnar, head of convoys, you stand accused of high treason. Of conspiring with our enemies, the Ice Wolves, and betraying the Alpha King. Chaos erupted. Guards moved swiftly, apprehending the two conspirators, who struggled and cried out, their pleas of innocence quickly dissolving into desperate accusations. The court was in an uproar, shouts of outrage and disbelief filling the air. Sen stood by, a silent witness, her heart pounding. They had done it. They had exposed the traitors, but the victory felt hollow, tinged with a fresh wave of fear for Vorthen. He was still out there, injured, fighting a brutal war, unaware that his own pack had been cleansed of its internal poison. As Sabra was dragged past her, her eyes, filled with hatred and despair, locked with Sen's. You, she spat, venom in her voice. You, the unclaimed, the shadow. You will regret this. This is not over. The Alpha King may live, but he will never truly be safe. Not with you by his side. You are a curse, Sen. A cursed, unprotected burden, her words, though born of desperation, struck a cold chord within Sen. Was she a curse? A burden? Had Vorthen's attempt to protect her family and his own strange need for an unclaimed companion inadvertently exposed him to greater danger? The question gnawed at her, even as the guards dragged Sabra away, her screams fading into the chaos. Theron approached Sen, his face grim but resolute. We have the proof, Sen. Now we must send word to the Alpha King and prepare for his return. The reckoning is coming. Sen looked towards the northern sky where the distant mountains stood silhouetted against the deepening twilight. The shadow of treason had been exposed, but the serpent's coil was not yet fully unraveled. Vorthon was returning, and with him, the reckoning. And she, the unclaimed, stood at the precipice of a future more uncertain and more dangerous than ever before. Her heart whispered his name, a silent plea in the gathering darkness. The news of Sabra and Magnar's treachery ripped through the pack like a wildfire, sending shockwaves of outrage and disbelief. The swift, decisive action of Theron, guided by Sen's keen observations, had exposed a deep-seated conspiracy that had threatened to unravel the very foundations of Vorthon's rule. But even with the internal threat neutralized, a profound anxiety settled over the palace. Vorthon was still at the front, battling the ice wolves, and his injuries were still a source of hushed, fearful whispers. Sen felt the weight of the court's gaze intensify. No longer simply the Alpha King's peculiar companion, she was now recognized as the one who had seen what others had missed, the one who had brought the hidden serpent to light. The whispers still followed her, but now they were tinged with a reluctant respect and a nascent, uneasy awe. She had proven her worth, not with a bond or a claim, but with an intellect and a loyalty that had transcended her unprotected status. Yet Sabra's parting curse, "You are a curse, Sen, a cursed, unprotected burden," still echoed in her mind, a venomous seed of doubt. Had her presence somehow invited this betrayal, simply by forcing Vorthon to challenge tradition? Days blurred into a tense waiting game. Messengers flew back and forth from the northern front, bearing reports of fierce fighting and heavy losses, but also of a renewed vigor among the loyal warriors, now that the internal sabotage had ceased. Then a single, triumphant message arrived. The Ice Wolves were in retreat, broken and scattered. The Alpha King was returning. The news sparked an explosion of relief and celebration in the palace. Preparations for Vorthon's return began immediately. The grand hall was cleaned, feasting tables prepared, and the finest silks and furs brought out. But for Sen, the anticipation was a torment. She longed to see him, to confirm his safety, to truly understand the meaning of the shared glances and whispered confessions they had exchanged. Yet she also dreaded his return, knowing that the fragile intimacy they had forged might be shattered by the realities of his regained power, and the public scrutiny that would now fall upon her. The scent of pine and snow, now mixed with the metallic tang of battle and the raw, untamed power of a victorious Alpha, filled the air long before Vorthon's retinue reached the palace gates. A palpable hum of excitement and reverence swept through the gathering crowd. Sen stood with Theron and the Beta generals, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat. And then he appeared. Alpha King Vorthon Belwick rode through the gates on a massive, dark warhorse, his powerful frame visible even from a distance. He was not pristine. His armor was scuffed and scarred, his cloak torn, and a fresh, angry gash ran across his left cheekbone. But his eyes, though weary, burned with an unyielding triumph. He was a warrior king, returned from battle, and the sheer force of his presence commanded absolute silence and awe. He dismounted with a powerful grace, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd. His eyes, storm gray and sharp, found Sen immediately. A flicker of something profound, relief, recognition, and a deep, possessive warmth passed between them, a silent language that transcended the hundreds of wolves separating them. It was a moment that stole her breath, a confirmation that their fragile bond had not been forgotten, not even in the crucible of war. He greeted his generals, accepted their reports, and moved through the hall like a tidal wave, acknowledging the cheers and bowing heads of his pack with a regal nod. Finally, he reached the dais, where Theron and Sen stood. Theron, Vorthon's voice was a low rumble, filled with exhaustion but also with immense gratitude. Your actions, and the timely exposure of the traitors, saved countless lives and turned the tide of battle. You have my deepest thanks and my unwavering trust. Theron bowed deeply, humility and pride warring on his face. It was Sen, Alpha King, who saw the serpent's coil. She pieced together the fragments. She gave us the path to expose the treachery. Vorthon's gaze, now filled with an intense, almost predatory satisfaction, settled on Sen. The entire court held its breath, their eyes darting between the formidable Alpha King and the unassuming, unclaimed Omega. Sen, he said, his voice dropping to a lower, more intimate timbre that carried to every corner of the silent hall. You trusted your instincts. You wielded the knowledge I gave you, not as a shield for yourself, but as a weapon for the pack. You proved that loyalty, freely given and fiercely defended, is indeed the most potent power of all. He stepped closer to her, his powerful presence overwhelming, yet strangely comforting. He lifted his hand, and for a heart-stopping moment, Sen thought he would touch her again, publicly, claiming her in front of all. Her pulse leaped, her inner wolf howling with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. But he didn't touch her. Instead, he reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was identical to the one in her chambers, the one that had held the silver dagger. He opened it, and nestled inside, on a bed of dark velvet, was a gleaming silver pendant. It was a simple design, a stylized wolf, its head thrown back in a silent howl, its form encircled by a delicate, unbroken chain. This, Vorthon declared, his voice ringing with a new, profound authority, is the mark of the unbound heart. It carries no claim of ownership, no title of status. It is a symbol of loyalty chosen, of strength forged in solitude, and of a spirit that cannot be broken by decree. He looked at her, his storm-gray eyes intense, filled with an emotion that made her heart ache. Sen, you are no longer unclaimed. You are unbound. You stand beside me, not as a shadow, but as a beacon, the one who taught this Alpha King the true meaning of mercy and the terrifying power of a heart offered freely. He held out the pendant. Sen, her hands trembling, took it. The silver was cool against her skin, but its meaning burned with a fiery warmth. It wasn't a bondmate's mark, not a rank. It was something far more profound. A recognition of her unique journey, her inherent worth, her courage. It was Vorthan's public acknowledgement of her power, a testament to her loyalty, freely given. Then, to the astonishment of the entire court, Vorthan took another step, placing himself directly in front of her, facing the assembled pack. He then turned his back to the court, placing his full trust, his vulnerable spine, towards her. It was an unspoken, yet utterly profound gesture. He was showing them, showing her, that his trust in her was absolute, that he was willing to expose his own vulnerability, his own heart, to her. And now, Vorthan declared, his voice echoing through the stunned silence, "Let the reckoning begin. Sabra and Magnar will face the full weight of justice. Their names will be erased, their families stripped of their titles, their lands forfeit to the pack. Let this be a lesson to all. Loyalty to the Alpha King is loyalty to the pack, and treason against either will be met with swift and absolute justice." His gaze, cold and unyielding, swept over the court, silencing any last vestiges of dissent or ambition. The message was clear: the Alpha King had returned, stronger than ever, and he would tolerate no further challenges. But then his eyes softened, turning back to Sen, a warmth returning to their depths. "And as for the future," he murmured, his voice now meant for her ears alone, yet carrying a resonance that all could feel. "The throne of this Alpha King will no longer be solitary. For I have learned that even the strongest Alpha is made stronger, not by ownership, but by the unbound loyalty of a shared heart." He didn't touch her again, not yet. But the look in his eyes, the profound trust he had just displayed before his entire pack, spoke volumes. Sen clutched the mark of the unbound heart, its cool silver a constant reminder of the impossible journey she had taken. She was no longer Elaine Calder, disgraced Omega. She was Sen, the unbound, standing at the side of a powerful Alpha King, her heart irrevocably tangled with his. The reckoning had come, not just for the traitors, but for her own understanding of mercy, power, and the terrifying, beautiful strength of a loyalty freely given. The path ahead was still uncertain, but she was no longer alone. She was unbound, and finally, truly home. Years had passed since the reckoning, since the Grand Hall had witnessed the Alpha King's return and his profound declaration of an unbound heart. The silver pendant, the mark of the unbound heart, now rested permanently at Sen's throat, a cool, familiar weight against her pulse. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a testament to a journey, a promise, and a bond forged not in tradition, but in fire and trust. The whispers in the palace had long since faded, replaced by an understanding, even reverence, for the unique position Sen held. She was not queen, not consort, not bondmate in the traditional sense. She was simply, powerfully, Sen, the Alpha King's chosen companion, his most trusted advisor, the silent strength at his side. The northern borders were finally at peace, the ice wolves driven back, their strength broken by Vorthan's strategic brilliance and the unwavering loyalty of his united pack. Sabra and Magnar and their co-conspirators had faced justice. Their names were indeed erased, their betrayal a cautionary tale etched into the pack's history. The Western pack, chastened by the exposure of their proxy's treachery, had renewed their oaths of fealty, their ambition cooled by Vorthan's unyielding resolve. Sen's life was full, rich, and utterly intertwined with Vorthan's. Her studies had continued, deepening her understanding of pack dynamics, ancient lore, and the complex art of leadership. She had become an invaluable resource to Vorthan, her insights often cutting through the noise of court politics, her quiet wisdom a steady anchor in the storms of governance. She spoke when asked, her words carrying the weight of careful consideration and profound loyalty. And when she didn't speak, her presence alone was a powerful statement, a reflection of Vorthan's own trust and her unwavering support. Their connection had deepened, evolving into something far more profound than the initial spark of forbidden attraction. It was a bond built on shared purpose, intellectual respect, and a quiet, abiding love that resonated in every glance, every shared silence. Vorthan, once a solitary figure burdened by his crown, had found in Sen not just a companion, but a soulmate who understood the profound loneliness of his power. He still carried the weight of his dominion, but he no longer carried it alone. Tonight, the full moon hung like a pearl in the inky sky, casting the royal wing in a soft, ethereal glow. Sen stood at the window of Vorthan's private study, the room that had witnessed so many pivotal moments in their journey. The scent of pine, old parchment, and Vorthan, a comforting, beloved aroma, filled the air. He was at his desk, as always, poring over documents, but tonight, his movements were slower, his gaze softer, tinged with a contentment she rarely saw him fully express. He looked up, his storm-gray eyes, now softened by years of shared understanding, met hers across the room. A slow, tender smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. The scar on his cheek, a permanent reminder of the Northern War, only added to his rugged charm. "You feel the pull tonight, don't you, my Sen?" he murmured, his voice a low, husky rumble that still sent shivers of pleasure down her spine. It was the same question he had asked all those years ago, but now it held a different meaning, a shared longing. She turned from the window, walking towards him, her steps light and sure. "Always, my Alpha," she replied, her voice soft, filled with an affection that was now freely given and deeply reciprocated. The wildness calls, but tonight it calls to a different kind of freedom. He rose as she approached, his powerful frame eclipsing the firelight, enveloping her in his warmth. He reached out, his calloused hands gently cupping her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. His gaze dropped to the silver pendant at her throat, then back to her eyes. "The mark of the unbound heart," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "It always reminds me of the most valuable lesson I have ever learned. That mercy, freely chosen and unprotected, is the most powerful force in our world. And that a heart, unbound by convention, can forge bonds stronger than any decree." He leaned in, his lips finding hers in a slow, tender kiss that spoke of years of shared history, of battles fought and won, of silent understandings and profound love. It was a kiss that melted away all doubt, all fear, leaving only the fierce, burning certainty of their connection. Her inner wolf, once muted by shame, now surged with a vibrant, joyful energy, recognizing its perfect complement in his. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "You taught me to be vulnerable, Sen," he confessed, his voice raw with emotion. "To trust not just power, but passion, not just loyalty, but love. And for that, I am eternally grateful." Sen reached up, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. "And you, my Alpha, taught me that to be truly unbound is not to be alone, but to be free to choose who to bind your heart to. You taught me that my greatest strength was not in being claimed, but in being worthy of your trust, of your love." He smiled, a genuine, profound smile that transformed his formidable face into one of pure tenderness. "You are more than worthy, my Sen. You are my world, and without you, my throne would indeed be solitary, cold, and utterly meaningless." He led her to the massive plush rug before the crackling fire. They sank to the floor, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close, their bodies fitting together as if they were carved from the same ancient stone. The firelight danced around them, casting long, intimate shadows as the moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the silver pendant at her throat. For a long time, they simply sat there, intertwined, finding solace and strength in each other's presence. The silence was not empty, but filled with the unspoken language of their shared heart, the deep resonance of two souls finally at peace. Sen closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. She was no longer the broken Omega, nor the unprotected shadow. She was Sen, the unbound, her heart irrevocably claimed by the Alpha King, not through decree or tradition, but through a love that had defied all odds. The Alpha King, once feared and alone, had found his equal, his counterpoint. in the wolf who stood unbound at his side. Theirs was a new kind of power, a new kind of reign built on trust, respect, and a love that was fiercely, beautifully, and eternally free. The throne was no longer solitary. It was unbound, and together they would rule, their shared heart beating as one. The story of Sen and Vorthon, of the unclaimed and the Alpha King, had found its true, eternal beginning.